How Israel is Benefiting the Fall of Revolutionary Rojava, written by Matt Broomfield in the article from the Jacobin magazine, Syria's Anti-Kurdish Offenses Suits Israel's Strategy. Israeli politicians often claim themselves as allies of Kurdish freedom against Arab dictators. Yet today Israel is dropping the act. Now it sees Syria's president, Ahmed al-Shara, as potential ally against Iran. On January 6, Israeli and Syrian leaders met in Paris for a US-sponsored talk, which saw Syria's Islamic President Ahmed al-Shara reach a tentative agreement aimed at the lasting security accord with Tel Aviv. The same day, the first shots were fired in Blitzkrieg offensive that has been al-Shara's force seized 80% of the territory of the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces. The move has brought the war to the gates of the Kurdish region known as Rojava, and to force the SDF to accept an unfavorable ceasefire and integrated agreement. These two revelations are closely related. Syrian Kurdish political leader says, especially since the former Al-Qaeda affiliate al-Shara seized power from Bashar al-Assad in December 2024, Israeli politicians have paid lip service to the plight of 2 million Kurds now besieged in isolated towns. Meanwhile, certain Syrian Kurdish leaders started to view Israeli opposition to al-Shara as a potential counterweight to the Syrian president design on Rojava, issuing a Hail Mary appeal to Tel Aviv for support. But on a geostrategic level, Israel appears consciously content with al-Shara, who is moving towards normalizing Israeli occupation in the country's south, while positioning himself as the key player of the United States anti-Iranian coalition. The new Sunni strongman in Damascus has offered Israel and the West an irresistible combination of quaintest foreign policy and tight control of domestic policy, leaving the Kurds out of the cold once more. The Paris Plan. I'm not saying Israel is working together with al-Shara, although that is not stretch. But what is happening is the result of understanding reached in Paris between Israel and al-Shara, and the victims here are the Kurds. Senior Kurdish diplomatic representative Abdulkarim Omar told Jacobin, and I quote, the US was in attendance, as well as the Turkish Foreign Affairs Minister and former intelligence chief Hakan Fidan, and they devised a plan to begin attacking Rojava. End quote. Diplomatic sources repeat similar claims to Reuters, describing a critical meeting last month in which US and Israeli officials both greenlit al-Shara's offensive, which saw government forces rapidly gain control of large Arab hinterland, including former ISIS capital Raqqa, aiming massive Arab defections from the formerly Sunni-ethnic SDF. Omar speaks in Qamishlo, capital of the de facto autonomous region of the Kurdish movement, had governed for the past 14 years on the basis of nominally feminist, direct democratic political inspired by the PKK. Government forces has besieged key Kurdish cities in Kobani, cutting off medicine and food supplies, while drone strikes and advances by government-allied tribal forces threatened to sever Qamishlo from the south border, crossing linking Rojava to the outside world. Damascus had deployed a Turkmen and Islamic militiamen with long-term anti-Kurdish vendettas, including Commando Section for a war crime against the Kurds. It has also benefited from the Turkish intelligence and technology as the executives Anarka's long-term goal of liquidating the Kurdish-led region. Simultaneously, al-Shara is effectively using Hasbara-style tactics to describe the Rojava project as a new exercise in separatist terrorism. As observers had noted, the Syrian Arab Army produced maps identifying Kurdish populated districts of Aleppo as terrorist-occupied open fire zones. Government activities marked the tunnel network painstakingly dug out by the SDF to shelter them from years-long campaign of Turkish airstrike as proof that cowardly Kurdish terrorists are sheltering both hospitals in dense urban environments. Public posturing in support of the Kurd secular project by Washington and Tel Aviv, not to mention Moscow, has never translated into material support in the face of the Turkey's prior anti-Kurdish offensive in Syria. This also meant that these latest reservoirs were met with resignation of the Kurdish streets. When the author of the article visited Rojava shortly after Assad's dramatic 2024 after, local civilians and frontline fighters now frequently expressed unlikely hopes of direct Israeli military support for the Kurdish-led administration, which immediately faced attacks from the Kurdish-backed militias now directed by al-Shara. The Kurds are like children who grew up without parents, leaving desperate for love from anyone, a local journalist told the author at the time. A year on, the move was swift, While the United States has long maintained a tactical temporary transnational presence in Syria Kurdish territory on the basis of U.S. Kurdish collaboration against ISIS, Donald Trump appointed envoy to Syria Tom Borak made it clear that Washington's interest now lies with Damascus. Speaking on the streets of Kosovo with an AK-47 in his hand, a senior Syrian Kurdish politician, Kebir Hassan, repeats sentiment held by thousands of ordinary Kurds now taking up arms throughout Rojava, and I quote, "Due to the silence of the international community, we have to protect ourselves," he says. The Syrian government reached shady deals under their own initiative. We don't get to see them, and we don't expect them. Soldiers on the front line openly expressed hope that the ceasefire and integration deal will collapse if the United States departs, giving them the opportunity to fight mano a mano with forces they view as indistinguishable from al-Nusra Front militia they fought against in Kurdish territory in 2013, prior to any collaboration with the United States. The last stage appear to Tel Aviv had naturally disappointed the Kurdish supporters of the feminist and international left, including international volunteers still on the ground in Rojava. More seriously, they contributed to the ongoing polarization of Syria, politics on ethnic grounds, especially for the Syrian government massacre, which killed over 1,000 members of the Alawite and Druze minorities in 2025, the latter only halted by direct Israeli intervention. Kurds fear ethnic contribution by Islamic forces, ideologically indistinct from the Kurds' long-term nemesis of the Islamic State. Conversely, overtures to Tel Aviv have only intensified the ever perception of the Kurds as Western proxies, fighting for the identitarian cause with no place of a Sunni majority in Syria. Ugly scenes of government fighters desecrate cemeteries, in fact belonging to Kurdish allied Arab fighters, or toppling the statue of an Arab freedom fighter in the anti-ISIS war, show the depth of this bitter polarization. A Kormislo correspondent, anti-Arab sentiment runs high, as armed Kurdish youth spend sleepless nights on patrol and looking for Arab colonized collaborating with Damascus, inevitably describing as ISIS sleeper cells, in language picked up from the Kurds' long-term U.S. partners. In reality, there was always a deep tension between the Kurdish state version of multi-ethnic Federal Brotherhood of the People and the reality of their military control over a large, restricted Arab population. For the ADS long offered a more palatable package of basic security and humanitarian provision in Syria's complex map of control, Arabs nonetheless chafed under heavy-handed security measures and political projects generally viewed as smokescreen for furthering Kurdish interests. With Assad's 2024 defeat, the Kurdish project was no longer the only show in town. The massive Arab defectors that accompanied the ADS 2026 collapse were thus occasioned by a mix of legitimate Arab grievance, tribal opportunism, as al-Shara's root consulate, and simple desire to live in a unitary, internationally recognized state. In this context, Israeli cultivated self-image as a friend to non-Arab minority has only exposed the Kurds to retributive violence. Whether by force or arms, at the negotiating table, those majority Arabs were always likely to revert to government control. But it is now the fate of Rojava's Kurdish heartland and the hands of the balance, a fate likely to be decided by ongoing shift in the U.S.-Israeli policy as the region gears up for Washington's mute operation against Iran. And the 11-hour ceasefire agreement has been reached between Damascus and Kamisol, with Kurdish divisions expected to integrate into Syria army or retaining a limited degree of military and political integrity. By most locals, place no more stocks in the ceasefire than free agreements successfully violated by al-Shara's forces as they surge across the Euphrates River, treating it with the same decision they applied to the Brotherhood of the People slogan. Rather, the expectation is the United States will likely stick around for only as long as it takes for their forces to complete a last-minute extraction program, flying thousands of ISIS detainees unheld the Kurdish to neighboring Iraq. These urgent deportation exports a contradiction in the heart of the U.S. policy in Syria. If the United States believes al-Shabaab is willing and positioned to take over anti-ISIS operation, why is it frantically flying out ISIS members the moment their Kansas detention center risks capture by al-Shabaab's forces? This contradiction is deep rooted in the U.S. security establishment, where the Pentagon followed up on the prior experience in Iraq to partner with the secular Kurds as part of its war on terror. The CIA backed moderate Islamists against Assad in line with its long-term policy against communist states. The Pentagon Central Command currently appears to be slowing down the ISIS deportation program to throw a final bone to their Kurdish partners, With US escalation against Iran looming, the anti-Iranian tendency is winning out. US policy is aligned behind al-Sharaa, with the White House backing the CIA's position through its Trump-appointed pro-Turkish Syria envoy Tom Barrack. The United States appears reassured that the new Sunni strongmen in Damascus can ensure their interests against Shia militias now massing along the Syrian-Iraqi border, obviating the key factor that ultimately motivates the United States' long-term presence in Syrian Kurdish region. We also can't ignore the fact that Don Parra has stated openly that he prefers that the new regime change in Iraq should be a monarchy. Al-Sharaa is benefiting from this global dynamic to exert her domestic control. Al-Sharaa is reaching an agreement with everyone in order to remain in power. Kurdish official Omar says, with Russia, Israel, Turkey, and the Gulf states joining the international coalition against ISIS, anything it takes to remain in power. Alongside the ongoing U.S. withdrawal, Russia also pulled out of its long-term base in Qamishmo in a bid to preserve its more strategic military presence on Syria's Mediterranean coast. Al-Sharaa has already returned the favor, flying to Moscow to break bread with Vladimir Putin, even though Russian Air Force had long pondered his forces with airstrikes as part of a year-long campaign to keep Assad in power. Likewise, al-Sharaa is proving himself able to deal with both Israel and Turkey, the two competing regional powers to dominate his new Syria. It would be an exaggeration to say Damascus and Tel Aviv have put their long-term interests to rest. Israel continued to launch airstrikes, conduct land operations, and oppose Turkey's expansion elsewhere in Syria, even as it ignored the conflict in Kurdish regions, while Damascus is cautious about normalizing relations with Israel, given al-Sharaa's militant Islamist base of support. Nevertheless, Tel Aviv appears consciously content with the status quo in Syria, as it focuses attention on Iran and proxy militias in Iraq. Turkey and Israel had their differences in Syria, but the two powers would be crucial U.S. allies in any assault on Iran, and each is finding a functional interlocutor on al-Sharaa. The new president is willing to license both Turkey's long-term goal of liquidating Kurdish autonomy in the north and Syria's de facto occupation in the south. It may even suit Israel's interests if Turkey is allowed to deepen its profound security relations with al-Sharaa, since these realities justify Israel's own occupation. The PKK founder Abdullah Öcalan, who will soon enter his fourth decade captivity in Turkey, has recently allowed to speak out by his Turkish captors part of an ongoing peace process, a part intended to streamline Israeli design on Syria by drawing the HDF towards an accord with Ankara. In published minutes of these discussions, the PKK leader referenced his historic anti-Zionist position and describes himself as the only person able to prevent the HDF from falling under Israeli dominance. He instead called for a modus vivendi, where Turkey has its word. Israel has been at this for 30 years. For 3 decades, Israel has been secretly promised us a state. Ochoa goes on to predict the Gazaization of Kurdish territory across Syria and Iraq as Israel attacks and positions those countries. Yet the Gazaization can occur under both Israeli and Turkish dominance. Even if the latest Kurdish Damascus ceasefire deals hold, the map of northern Syria proposed under his new deal already implemented Kurdish occupied zones of the north, and the country will closely resemble the occupied West Bank. Kurds and their political leaders are being hammed into isolated enclaves said to be patrolled by ethnically Kurdish but centrally controlled security forces and systematically denied access to the resources, border crossings, and international political access. They need to preserve any meaningful autonomy. Syrian Kurds might condemn their former Western backers and look to their own weapons for protection, but they seem unlikely to be able to withstand Syria's new Western-backed order for long. Given this strategy of only supporting the Kurds just enough for tactical victory but not full liberation, can all trace back to the policies of Henry Kissinger.